Welcome back. In this final segment, we're going to talk about income and wealth inequality. Income inequality is a disparity in income distribution. This means that not only do high-paid workers make more, they proportionally make much more than low-wage earners. Since the 1980s, upper management pay has spiked and risen rapidly, while worker pay, adjusted for inflation, has remained stagnant. Additionally, tax burdens have shifted significantly in this period as well. There are more ways for the wealthiest people to avoid paying taxes, leaving the burden for funding the government on middle and working class people. Social mobility has also stagnated, pretty much in line with the trend of wage stagnation. Education costs have skyrocketed, making it more difficult for lower wage earners to afford to pay for higher education for themselves or their children, education being one of the best ways to spur social mobility. The digital divide has also held lower income people back. Some neighborhoods have easy access to internet services and the means to pay for the monthly costs. Other areas have few or no options, particularly those that are rural. As everything we do increasingly moves online, job searches and applications, education, research, housing searches, and so on, those who have limited access to the internet are at a significant disadvantage, and that impedes social mobility. Wealth inequality is a bit different than income inequality. Income is the amount of money you are bringing in, either from work or from investments. Wealth is the total of all you own. In the United States, the top 1% possess 24% of the total income, but the top 1% also has 40% of the total wealth of the country. That is a very small group in control of almost half of everything owned in the United States. So, why are people not more outraged by this? In large part, it's due to the myths of meritocracy and class mobility, that is, the American dream. We're taught that anyone who grinds hard enough can make it big. You just have to put in the time and effort. And we want to believe that that's possible. And if it is possible, then the people who are currently at the top got there because they worked that hard and were just that smart and talented. Unfortunately, the data doesn't really agree with this narrative. Virtually all wealthy people were born into wealthy families, and were able to stay wealthy due to the access and connections their families possess. What patterns can we find about income and wealth inequality? This graphic gives us a sense of just how lopsided the income inequality is. Over on the left, you can see the average income levels of 90% of the US population. This is about $50,000, which barely registers on this chart. By comparison, the top 0.1% averages almost $7 million a year. Here, we can see that play out over time. In 1979, there was a relatively even step up between the bottom 90%, the top 1%, and the top 0.1%. And note, these are adjusted to all be in relative 2017 dollars, so we're still comparing apples to apples. But by 2007, though, the inequality is stark. The annual wages for the bottom 90% haven't really budged, while the top wage earners have seen massive growth. The dip you see was caused by the Great Recession, which began in late 2007. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Oh, and for the sharp-eyed among you, you'll notice that the top 0.1% in this slide are making about $2,750,000 in 2017, while in the previous slide, the top 0.1% was listed as making almost $7 million in 2017. The difference is that this chart is referencing wages, what's in your paycheck, in compensation for your labor. In the previous slide, their scale was for income, which is all revenue sources. The wealthiest people's income is generated in large part from investment income rather than from a paycheck. And just to check if you're paying attention, if you send me an email explaining the differences between wages and income, I'll give you an extra 5 points on your midterm exam. Here, we can see how, over time, income has risen for the top 1%, while falling for the bottom 50% of wage earners. The richest people are getting richer, while the poorer people are getting poorer. We can see here that it's not that most people aren't working hard. Since 1973, productivity has continued to increase, while compensation for work has not increased much at all. Basically, this is saying people are working much harder for not any more money. We know that a wage gap exists between men and women. This chart makes it clear that the wage gap is about the same ratio regardless of education levels, and that wage gap exists regardless of race, although the ratios are a bit different. This is due in part to a larger percentage of white and Asian men holding high-paying jobs compared to white and Asian women. Black and Hispanic folks are statistically more likely to end up with lower-paying jobs, where the difference in pay is less drastic. We can see that play out in this chart, which shows a steady racial wage gap over the past 50 years. In late 2007 through 2009, the United States, along with the rest of the Americas and Europe, suffered what is colloquially known as the Great Recession, due in large part to failures in investment in risky mortgages, a sharp drop in previously inflated housing prices, and poor financial regulation to protect against these failures. This severely impacted the banking industry and stock markets, which subsequently affected all other businesses' abilities to obtain loans for continued operation, and created a spike in unemployment. As with so many situations, the impact was felt most harshly by lower and middle-income people. As you can see from these charts, the overall wealth of all races was significantly impacted by the recession and its subsequent fallout. However, not all groups recovered evenly. Overall, lower-income white families and middle-income Black and Hispanic families lost the greatest percentage of family wealth. Middle-income whites were able to recover a fair amount of family wealth after the crisis, and lower-income Black and Hispanic families did not see much change overall. We can attribute this to three factors. First, the sharp drop in housing prices reduced the wealth of many people practically overnight. Remember, for most Americans, the majority of our wealth is tied up in our homes. The second factor was the distribution of low-quality mortgages. Lower-income whites and middle-income Black and Hispanic families were the most likely to be given a subprime mortgage, which means it had a higher interest rate. When housing prices fell, they often owed more on their mortgage than their house was worth, and many people were evicted or just walked away from their homes. This has a devastating effect on a family's wealth. To be forced to abandon your greatest wealth while impacting your future credit options actually puts your net wealth in the negative. Overall, this effect pulled down the average wealth for these groups significantly. Finally, the neighborhoods where middle-income white families live are usually considered more desirable than the neighborhoods where middle-income Black and Hispanic families and lower-income white families live. As the economy recovered, the housing prices in those more desirable neighborhoods increased more dramatically than those in the less desirable neighborhoods. We can see here how the recession affected people of different classes. Lower-income households lost almost half of their net worth. Middle-income households lost about 50% of their net worth. But upper-income families actually came out of the recovery doing better than any other group. This is attributable in large part to where our wealth resides. For lower and middle-income households, that's usually our homes. For upper-income households, though, a home is only one asset, and assets such as stocks recovered at a higher rate than home prices. So, what corrects this trend? There are a lot of theories and ideas that include tightening banking regulations and forgiving debts, but the ideas with the most data to support them are to use taxes as a way to redistribute wealth, and to raise the minimum wage. Raising the minimum wage immediately helps the poorest workers, and over time forces all wages to increase. Raising taxes on the wealthiest allows government to fund programs that help reduce poverty and create opportunities for people to increase their personal income and wealth through education and business creation. These plans together will go a long way towards unfreezing social mobility in the United States.